Hello one and all, and welcome back to the RimWorld Eternal Winter series, where, my friends, we are currently still enduring the frozen pain of the icy wind as our little white marble of a planet is traveling throughout the universe. Yes indeed, it would seem whatever magic is keeping our planet in this icy state continues to persist, although it doesn't seem like our animals are having any issues with it. As you may notice, they are reproducing a little bit too often for my liking. So one of the first things that we're going to be doing today is getting rid of all these bison calves. Normally the solution to this problem is for us to just slaughter them and eat them, but as you could probably see here in the top right of your screen, we actually have a stuffed pantry full of meat, so instead I would like to sell them and stuff our treasury a little bit more. We would send out Lim and Snowdrop on this trading mission. That way Snowdrop could kind of begin to earn the respect of all the nobles and her family, of course, but this will take quite some time, so we'll check back in on them later. Back home at the keep though, I've decided that I'm going to name our nightmare. I've actually decided to name it Arvac. Now you may be familiar with this name, and so was our good friend Winter Sealing 9661, who made a good comparison here between our nightmare horse and Arvac from Skyrim. And you know me, I am a massive Skyrim fan and or nerd, so that's what I've decided to go with. After that, I decided to begin working on a new iron helmet for Jarl Raj. Now, given the events of last episode with the elemental assault and Raj falling and almost dying in his own bedroom, I thought it might be best if he had a better helm. Of course, this new helm will provide much more protection for the Jarl, but I also felt that it was more fitting of a Jarl, and just as well his new sword and his attire. Speaking of fitting attire and whatnot, I have also decided to go ahead and dye his armor and cloak and everything else that he has on to give him a more fitting appearance. And I will say I was pretty pleased with the outcome, all except for the cloak, which later on in the video you may notice is a little bit darker or not. I don't know if I'll get around to it, but I may. Anyhow though, I really like how it looks, and I do think that this also helps him and the Blood Guard and just everyone else have a more uniform look when we do this. And of course that is very important to us because we want to be able to distinguish ourselves apart from the other medieval houses and dynasties. We would also take a hot second here to continue expanding the storage of our treasury and adding in some beautiful flooring since we have moved it on down the hallway since last episode. As we were working on that, we had finally ended up recruiting the ice mage known as Zaire, someone who I feel will make a perfect addition to our dynasty, but not only just to the dynasty, I also think I want Zaire here to be a special member in our Blood Guard. So of course I would go through and dye his armor and other apparel, and once again of course I was pretty pleased with the results. Now I didn't give him identical armor to Sissy because I want him to be something of a different class. I'm thinking of calling him a battle mage since he is the only mage that is part of the Blood Guard. Of course we can always have more battle mages, but specifically I think that he may be just reporting directly to the Jarl. Almost like a court wizard, but not exactly. Let me know what you guys think a wonderful title and or class would be for Zaire though. Checking back in on Lim and Snowdrop though, they had finally arrived at their destination to do a little bit of trading with another medieval house. We would end up selling to them all of our bison calves. We would also sell plenty of muffalo and bison wool, and just as well we would also finally sell them plenty of weapons. We ended up getting plenty of silver for this. We also got some gold because they ran out of silver, and we also got Jarl Raj a little bit of a surprise. Just a little something to help Snowdrop gain some favor with her father. Back home once more though, we would end up building some display shelves just behind the throne. Now this was the perfect place to put our artifact helmet that we had gotten last episode. And of course we still had plenty of space for any other artifacts that we ended up coming across in our travels. But speaking of travelers, we ended up having a slaver come from Hayabindo. Not really sure how you pronounce this medieval house's name, though I do suspect it may be in Elvish, as a high portion of their population are elves. But you don't care about that, you care about what I bought, or more specifically, who I bought. Well, I actually didn't want to keep anyone else in bondage, so I ended up buying someone who would join our nobility. Her name was Lao, and she had a pet yeti Apparently they were a package deal, so I ended up buying both of them along with a dire wolf. Now, Lau here wasn't very good at most things, but she was one hell of a shot and one hell of a fighter, and I'm pretty sure her Yeti could pick up the slack in any battle she's in, so I think it was well worth it. The dire wolf we purchased would be the perfect companion for Azza/Kaz, so of course if you have a name for the dire wolf, the Yeti, or any of our little creatures, be sure to let me know in the comments section. I'm always extremely excited to see what names you guys come up with and the reasons as to why. In the meantime though, I did notice Pia laying silently in her bed asleep, surely missing Robin since his death last episode, and it just kind of broke my heart, and I felt so bad for her all alone, and I thought she could really use some companionship, and maybe, just maybe, even a promotion. That's right, I'm going to have Squiggle begin working on some brand new armor for Piyub, a brand new helmet, as well as some brand new Iron Knight's armor. Yes indeed, I want Piyub to become a member of our Blood Guard, no doubt a great honor on its own, but especially given the fact that Robin, her spouse and or lover, was also a member of the Blood Guard and died during his duties, and she shall pick up his mantle as sworn protector of the Jarl and his bloodline, defending them from any threats, foreign or domestic, and in the process, making her husband proud. The Blood Guard is now 3 strong, with Sissy leading our little chapter here. I only hope to continue growing the Blood Guard exponentially as we continue recruiting more people or purchasing people's freedom. Of course, we'll have to continue expanding our barracks as we do so, but for the time being, they seem to be pretty comfy in their bunks. Whether they know it or not, they are now a family, brothers and sisters in arms. Speaking of family, Snowdrop and Lim had finally returned home from their extensive trading mission that took many days. As they entered the city walls, they were ecstatic to see all their friends and loved ones, and they were very glad that nothing bad had happened in their absence. We would begin unloading all of our items from our bison, some of which were actually some steel statues that I had neglected to mention earlier. Now, I didn't plan on decorating with these, but we were actually going to deconstruct them for the material. And of course, we had also brought back about 95 ingots of solid gold. Also on top of that, we brought back Rosh's gift, which was some newfound invention called a telescope. We're not exactly sure as to what type of magic powers this little mystical invention, but apparently it allows you to look at distant things and they appear very close to you, such as planets or stars. Needless to say, Rosh was extremely pleased and excited about the gift from Snowdrop, and he immediately began using it that night to do a bit of star mapping. Who knows, someday someone may even find a way to reach these heavenly bodies in all their mystery and beauty. While still on the topic of beauty, we would begin using what textiles we didn't sell, such as our muffalo, bison wool, and raw hide, to begin making plenty of rugs. I really want to try to beautify the kingdom, a theme that I want to try and continue throughout each episode when we have time. Not only do these rugs exponentially increase the beauty of any room that they're in, keeping all of our nobility very happy, but also, of course, these rugs are a status symbol among all of the medieval dynasties. We have to keep up appearances if the Imperials were to come over, or any other medieval house. However, it wouldn't take very long for there to be a good bit of bad news, unfortunately. We have a very large man-hunting pack of wyverns that have come here to eat our flesh after searing it with their fire. Now, originally, I was extremely fearful of these wyverns, as I thought that they would just burn us directly through our embrasures, but I seem to have forgotten that this type of wyvern doesn't actually seem to breathe fire at all, or if it does, that none of them decided to use it against us, so they were actually fairly easy to kill from behind our towers. However, even so, that didn't mean that they were all easy to kill, as some of them actually got around to our entrance and came in where we would have to engage them directly without the help of our embrasures. And as you can imagine, this did complicate things just a little bit. bit, but luckily we still had the upper hand as a large group of our people together firing at them and everything like that. Of course, the big hail of bullets and arrows seemed to do the trick. And just like that, we now have a smorgasbord of dead wyverns littering the entire territory. Well, not all of them were dead actually, some of them needed a helping stab or two to help them into the afterlife, so we happily obliged. And now comes my favorite part of this massive manhunter pack, the part where we drag them into our butchery here and start chopping them into pieces, and I actually plan on using all this wyvern meat for some nice soups. Actually, that was a lie. We're using the wyvern meat for some simple meals, and for the soup we're using our winter bloom, as these are vegetable soups and they're one of the more low-tier simple types of soups that you can make. Nevertheless though, even with that being said, these vegetable soups still give everyone a +2 mood buff. It's not a lot, but it is better than nothing, which is what we get from the simple meals. And very soon, I do hope to start making some better soups that also give a larger boost. I then decided to begin working on a mine in the northern mountains. You know, recently we've been having to literally move mountains by mining them out for any stone chunks as well as any ores that we would like, such as gold or iron, so I thought maybe in this massive mountain that we have just above our keep, it might be best to set up something more permanent. It wouldn't take us very long at all to find plenty of iron ore veins as well as a few gemstones and of course plenty of granite chunks. But of course we'll check back in later to see just how successful this mine is. As for now, I began thinking, you know, we've dyed Rasha's armor and gave him a new set of armor of course as well, but I want to try and dye the other royal family members, that way they all kind of have a more uniform royal look to them. And so of course that is exactly what I did. And I must say that I am pretty pleased with the outcome here. Now mostly what we're seeing is some blue and white and a few hints of red. Now a lot of the red unfortunately is our undergarments such as our shirts and our pants, so you can't really see them on the characters. However, this is sticking right with the color scheme of our banner and thus our dynasty. Let me know what you guys think about this color scheme though, but I do really like it and I hope you do as well. Checking in on Squiggle here in her forge, it would appear that the mines in the northern mountain have been going quite well as we have a lot of iron ore that's being smelted. Exactly what we were hoping for, I might add. Now that we have an overabundance of iron and more importantly granite blocks, I've decided that I want to build us a nice little tavern. A nice little place where we can all sit together with our nobility and get a few drinks, tell some stories, and just kind of shoot the shit together. We worked on it late into the night, and unfortunately our construction was interrupted by a couple of mad muffalos. Actually, it was more like a small pack, although it wasn't much of an issue. We quickly put them down and then threw them into our butchery where we would begin chopping them up for our meals. The following day we would continue our extensive construction on this new granite tavern. As you can see, I went with a pretty simple design of a few tables with some log stools, except for a few normal wooden chairs, with a nice little fireplace as well as some fermenting barrels. And of course, to kind of top things off, I threw in a plant pot as well as a very large rug to really beautify the drinking area. And last but not least, the section of the tavern I've yet to mention, I have a growing zone where the tavern owner, who has yet to be chosen I suppose, will actually be growing their very own hops for their alcohol. All in all, I was pretty happy with how this turned out, and I think that it is a splendid place for our folks to celebrate their parties and spend some of their late nights. Truly, with all the new additions that we've added in the last few episodes especially, I feel like the keep as well as the dynasty overall has really come together, and it's really taking shape. I do think it's very beautiful. It's always been one of my favorite parts about RimWorld, just seeing how the colonies and towns really come together and just how they grow. I really enjoy it. Something else I really love is finding and meeting new members of our nobility's family, so we actually have a royal tribute collector here, and among their members just so happens to be Sissy's daughter-in-law and also Lau's mother. We may look into trying to get them to join us later on. As for now, I was thinking about maybe actually making a tribute to the Empire so that we could try to ally with them. I offered them all the gold that I had, but I wasn't very pleased with the very small amount of favor that would give me, so I decided not to do it. Perhaps another time, but as for now, it looks like we have a raid by a bunch of Impids who actually caught the Imperials off guard, unfortunately for them, and now the two of them are locked in a hellish battle surrounded by fire. The odds were not exactly in the Imperials' favor. I was going to bring our army down to try and give them an assist. Ozza came out and started firing ice blasts from her wands, but accidentally hit one of the Imperials, which very much decreased relations with him, so until the Impids are finished, I'm going to hold fire. Which I will admit is kind of shitty of me. We don't have any obligations to the Imperials, of course, but some of them being the family members of our nobility, I felt a bit guilty. Some hours later into the night, though, the Impids were finally done with the Empire, and they were making their way towards the keep, and they were coming straight for our heads. Of course, though, we would have ample opportunity to try and begin defending ourselves. They would, however, very quickly begin surrounding our towers, and it didn't help anything that Lim accidentally left the door wide open, so one of them came right in. Luckily, though, we had managed to down them as well as many of the other Impids. The Jarl would be sure to take his part out on the battlefield against an Impid knight covered in demon scale armor, who quickly fell to the dragonbone sword. With the majority of the threat now neutralized, we would actually begin taking several of these Impids prisoner, taking them back into the prison where we would actually begin healing them so they don't die, just as well we would also begin trying to recruit them. An extensive process that no doubt will take quite a while. In the meantime, I actually wanted to try out Squiggle's dwarven magically gifted healing abilities on Ozza, who was damaged during the battle. I would do this several times as her mana would regenerate, and it actually seemed to work quite well. I also noticed that several of the Imperial soldiers hadn't actually died out on the battlefield, but were severely bruised and battered, so I actually sent some of our men out to rescue them. We would try to nurture them back to health, that way we could get some good favor with the Empire. However, not all of the Imperials were this lucky, unfortunately, and one of which was Vey, who just so happened to be the daughter-in-law of Sissy. An awful discovery, to be sure. One of the survivors, however, actually did end up being Lau's mother, though, so I suppose that is a little bit of good news. Given the circumstances with what's happened, I only thought it would be fair that we allow Sissy the opportunity to try and send a raven out to contact his son, to see if he'd like to join us here. Unfortunately, after doing so, though, Sissy's son immediately declined the offer. I suppose that will just leave him to grieve in peace. Some time later, we were actually having a birthday party for Piub in our brand new tavern, and let me tell you, it was quite the shindig? I'm not really sure, but they were all having a great time. Having a few beers, some stews, and even a little bit of bread. Then for a while, I would just kind of kick back and let everyone do their thing, mining in the brand new mines that we built in the northern mountains, cleaning, cooking, whatever their little hearts desired. We then received a message via pigeon by the leader of Hayabin. I still don't know how to say this medieval faction's name, but they were saying that their friend wants to learn about our culture for quite a bit of time, and they would be willing to give us a good bit of their goodwill, so of course we accepted to better our relationship. Our guest ended up arriving a few hours later, who was apparently named after fecal matter. A little weird, but who am I to judge the traditions of the elves? She immediately began making herself at home using the Jarl's personal telescope, though we would allow it as we didn't want to jeopardize the relationship with her home faction. Later on into the night, Lau's mother had finally been healed from her little skirmish with the Impids, and it was time for her to depart. She would end up leaving through the southern part of the map. Though Lau was very sad to see her go, she decided she would give her some time to get back home and maybe write her via pigeon. The following morning, our other two Imperial guests would also end up departing after being healed from their wounds as well, and I will say this was a little bit odd because I was thinking I would get some goodwill with them. Maybe it just takes a little bit more time, but I never seem to end up getting goodwill with the Empire for healing their soldiers. About a day or so passed, and then I decided it would be a good time for Lau to try and invite her mother to join us back here as one of our nobility. Unfortunately, though, her mother would end up denying this request, and I was becoming a bit desperate and really wanted someone of her family to join, so we would also end up trying for her brother, who also ended up denying us. Truly quite a shame, but I do have some good news at the very least. It is finally tournament day. Yes indeed, our second annual tournament day where we have our prisoners and or slaves have a gladiator battle. This year, instead of having our slaves fight, I thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to have our two imped prisoners throw down with some steel daggers, so of course they were off. They would immediately begin circling one another, and I actually began to decide that the winner of this battle will actually win a spot as a member of our Blood Guard, one of the highest honors the Jarl can bestow. After Rosh made this announcement to the participants, the two of them really picked up their speed and really started to take this thing very serious. But not to spoil it, unfortunately there wasn't really a clear-cut winner here. There were many stabs on each side with their little steel daggers, but it was pretty well a stalemate. So, truth be told, I'm not really sure if I should make both of them Blood Guard or neither of them. I suppose you guys could always help me out with that. With the battle over though, we would begin taking them back to their prison cells and we would begin healing them. All in all though, the duel was pretty good and both participants put their whole hearts into it, which was wonderful. Something even more wonderful was immediately after this, we would begin celebrating tournament day in the brand new tavern with some good food, better company, and even better cigars from the Jarl's personal stash that he actually ended up sharing with Ozza. Only the finest of cigars for the finest of friends and family on the most wonderful of occasions, of course. Moments like these truly warm my heart, seeing all of them together. And, of course, as everyone was celebrating, our two imped prisoners were lying in their cell bunks, trying to heal up from all the stab wounds that they caused on one another. Sorry about that there, guys, but we really have to toughen you up if you're going to be part of the Eternal Flame. We can't have any muffalo-teat-sucking milk drinkers among our ranks, now can we? And now finally, in one last desperate attempt here to try and get someone to join us, I actually ended up having Rosh contact one of his brothers who actually ended up accepting the offer, which was wonderful. Not only a new addition to the Eternal Flame, but a new addition that we already know and can ensure that we can trust them. It will take a little bit of time for him to arrive though. It's also worth mentioning that House Amboys, which is the home faction of Rosh's brother, has also seen this as an opportunity to strengthen our bond, and our relations with them have actually increased. After that, we ended up having our very first harvest and yield of our hops, which was perfect because now we could make some ale wort. Now, we could make some normal wort, but I felt that ale was much more fitting than normal beer. Besides, a normal beer can't compare to the nice warm feeling of having a belly full of ale or mead, keeping us nice and toasty here in this frozen hellscape. Speaking of which, we don't want Rosh's brother sleeping outside in some tent or canopy where he could freeze to death, nor would we want him in the normal residential building since he is technically part of the royal family. So we would actually end up mining out a small bedroom just across from his niece's where he'll be able to sleep. Though we were running low on wood, so I was trying to conserve what little bit we had left, and so of course we made his furniture out of bones, including his bed, so I hope it's comfortable. And would you look at that, speak of the devil, brother of Rosh, Rosario, has now finally arrived. Finally, the two of them reunited once more under the same banner, no less. And under Rosh's rule, more importantly. Rosario remarked to his brother just how proud he was of what a beautiful kingdom he's been building here, and once their other relatives realized just how big and powerful the Eternal Flame is becoming, it'll be almost impossible for them to turn down an offer to join. I also wanted to take a moment here and point out Rosario's stats and traits. So he is actually very good at shooting and melee. He's pretty good at cooking as well as decent at animals, and that's about it. He's a pessimistic cannibal recluse, which is very interesting to say the least. As a member of the Eternal Flame, I would have Rosario begin equipping some new weapons and a little bit of new apparel. Even though he is part of our royal family and our medieval house, I'm still going to allow him to retain his weapons and armor that may reflect his previous obligations to House Amboise, simply until he becomes more loyal to us and more acquainted with our faction, of course, but also because House Amboise is becoming a very close ally of ours, so it would make sense to see some of their people who have joined us still wearing that attire. During this time, we also ended up recruiting our impid prisoner known as Livin, and I've yet to equip her with anything because I will await your guys' decision whether or not she or the other impid or both of them should join the Blood Guard. So for the time being, I will let her enjoy her game of cup and dice. But now, my friends, we are finally winding down to the end of today's episode, but before we go, of course, I do want to discuss a little bit of lore that has been provided by all of you. First up, we have some lore by our good friend JD Top 5348, who was saying that long ago dragons used to walk the land with other creatures, but most of them were slaughtered and captured because of how good their skin was for weapons and armor. Once dragons roamed the land, now mostly extinct. And I do really like this idea, especially because that does open up the possibility of there being a handful of dragons left, maybe scattered across the entire planet, and that could also possibly be where the Wyverns came from. Maybe there's some type of subspecies from these dragons that once actually breathed fire, or something along those lines. And that would also explain why many of the impids especially end up wearing dragon skin armor and clothing. Next up, we have a comment by our good friend Diaz1521, who is giving some lore for the tournaments that are being held. So even in the north, with as cruel and harsh as it is to live here, even the most civilized of dynasties will hold these tournaments. At first, it was really to just cut the weak from the slave population, some form of entertainment, but over time it actually became a simulation of real combat, something like training for the younger members as well as the older and less experienced members, as we saw today with our impid prisoners. And I really like this as well because it adds some more depth to the culture of the planet as well as all the medieval dynasties who actually hold these gladiator tournaments, so thank you ever so much for that. And last but not least, we have a good bit of lore by our good compadre here, Local Femboy427, who is actually saying that in this land, of course, there are the impids, but there's no possible way that they could have been a natural species, but instead they are a result of the nuclear winter as well as the events that happened that caused this winter on this planet, along with the lore I believe we talked about in the second episode, or possibly third, sometime around when we actually began adding a lot of lore to the series, and how there was some type of apocalyptic event that happened on this planet, if you guys remember that. But anyhow, because of all that, this has actually allowed some type of mutation to become its own species, and thus becoming the impids with their own biologies and abilities. And to me, I really like this, and that makes a lot of sense because it is a bit strange seeing these fire-breathing humanoids on an eternal winter planet. So thank you ever so much for that comment and lore as well. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's episode. I love you guys ever so much. Remember, if you have any submissions for lore or ideas or anything like that, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I did want to say, if you add the word lore to your comment, it helps me out a lot when I'm actually searching for lore, because I can use that word to search for your comments. So if you don't mind doing that, of course, I would really appreciate it. But once again, thank you guys for watching. I love you. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.